And that first string of this, which has just a lot of awesome history goodies, is the reason why late 1800s, early 1900s, these bombs become so ubiquitous is because dynamite comes into existence. Can you talk just a little bit about where does that come from? Because it comes from a name I think a lot of people know but don't realize he was basically a bomb maker. How did that all come about?
It turns out that the story of dynamite is actually an amazing example of unintended consequences in innovation. I mean, one of the most extreme ones in a way. Most people know of Alfred Nobel from the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, and the other ones. In a way, the Peace Prize was a kind of peace offering that he created at the end of his life to make up for all the carnage he had inadvertently released into the world through his invention of dynamite. So he'd gotten obsessed as a young man around the kind of 1850s, 1860s with this newly discovered compound of nitroglycerin, which was one of the most unstable and explosive substances known to man, and really the first real advance on explosive power since the invention of gunpowder, which had been 1,000 years before. But anybody who had messed with nitroglycerin at this point had decided to walk away from it because it was just too unstable. Like you could just shake a jar of it or a vial of it and it would blow up in your face.
Or they already lost all their fingers and they couldn't work with it.
Or they lost all their fingers. They stopped investigating it because they were dead. But Nobel had this idea that if he could harness it, the opening chapter of the book is called The Controlled Explosion, right? Like if he could control this explosion, trigger it on demand, trigger it in a safe way, and enable it to be portable without accidentally exploding, that he would have an enormously, literally powerful new material that would revolutionize engineering. Was basically the idea. Like he thought, okay, if you can create this explosive that's so much more effective than gunpowder, you would, radically increase the efficiency and the speed of all these projects that were happening. This is the beginnings of industrialization. So giant railroad networks are being built and tunnels are being carved through mountains, and they're about to be skyscrapers built. And there's all the the Brooklyn Bridge and the Panama Canal. All these things are happening around the world that require explosives. And so he spends all this time perfecting it. It's kind of a tragic story. It's a story of really an obsessive on some level because his younger brother actually dies in a nitroglycerin explosion accidentally in a lab that Alfred Nobel had created, which most people might have just walked away at that point. But Nobel was like, no, I can make this work. Eventually he does, and he creates this kind of fusion of these two materials, nitroglycerin and diatomite, that enable the nitroglycerin to be stable and detonated successfully. And it's a huge hit. It does exactly what he intended it to do. It does revolutionize civil engineering all around the world. He becomes fantastically wealthy and one of the great kind of titans of industry. But it turns out the very same asymmetric power that it gives engineers, like a small band of people can now tunnel their way through a mountain without a lot of gear, turned out to give an equivalent power to political revolutionaries who suddenly could bomb a courthouse or a castle or a cafe with a stick of dynamite that was small and portable enough to be concealed inside their jacket. And in a very literal way, dynamite is the innovation that leads to this new innovation in political violence, which is what we now call terrorism, right? The idea that you would have these, deliberately spectacular attacks that would disrupt ordinary life or attack, wealthy titans of industry or political figures, and do it to get news and coverage around the world now, united by telegraphs and, all the communication systems of that period. That was a movement that really was made possible by dynamite. It ended up being this, this kind of tragic secondary effect of what Nobel had invented.